The judge leaned forward, tapped the stack of HOA paperwork with 2 fingers, and asked the question that changed everything. You're telling this court you fined this man $50,000 because of a sound? Nobody answered at first. Not the attorneys. Not the court reporter. Not even Rebecca Holloway, sitting there in her ivory blazer with her hands folded like she was attending a country club luncheon instead of a fraud hearing. The only thing moving in that courtroom was the old ceiling vent rattling above us and the faint squeak of leather every time someone shifted uncomfortably in their chair. I remember the smell most clearly. Burnt courthouse coffee and fresh printer toner. Funny how your brain locks onto details like that when your life is about to split into before and after. My name is Ethan Walker, and 3 months before that hearing, I was standing barefoot in my backyard holding a wrench while the Texas wind turned my father's old windmill for the first time in 12 years. Creak, creak, creak. The sound rolled across the dry evening air like an old memory waking up. I closed my eyes, and for half a second I could almost hear my dad laughing from the porch again, cigarette smoke drifting through the dusk while he yelled at me for over-tightening bolts. That windmill wasn't decoration. It wasn't some antique lawn ornament bought from a roadside flea market. My father used it to pump water across our ranch long before Willow Creek Estates existed, before the HOA signs, before the matching mailboxes, before Rebecca Holloway started ruling the neighborhood like a suburban dictator wrapped in designer perfume and property value reports. The first violation notice showed up 48 hours after the windmill started spinning again. Bright yellow envelope taped directly to my front door. Community non-compliance warning. The paper crackled in my hand while the blades turned slowly behind me in the sunset. According to the HOA, the windmill created unauthorized visual disturbance. 3 days later came another letter. Mechanical noise pollution. Then another. Rustic agricultural aesthetics negatively impacting neighborhood identity. I wish I were joking. Rebecca even attached printed photographs of my backyard taken by one of those little surveillance drones her HOA committee flew around like mosquitoes. Every angle highlighted in red circles and arrows like they were documenting a crime scene instead of a 70-year-old windmill sitting on private property. I tried ignoring it at first. That was my mistake. Because people like Rebecca treat silence like surrender. And Rebecca Holloway loved control more than oxygen. White Lexus. White teeth. White pantsuits. Everything about her looked polished enough to belong in a pharmaceutical commercial, except her eyes. Those stayed cold. Measuring. Every conversation with her felt like she was calculating resale value on your soul. The first time she knocked on my door, I could smell expensive perfume before I even opened it. She stood there smiling while the windmill creaked behind my house. "Mr. Walker," she said sweetly, "that thing has become a serious problem for the community." I looked past her shoulder at the subdivision glowing under orange streetlights. Perfect lawns. Perfect fences. Perfect little boxes lined up like copies of the same life. Then I heard the windmill turn again behind me. Creak, creak, creak. Rebecca's smile tightened instantly. That's when I realized something. It wasn't the noise bothering her. It was the reminder that something older than her HOA still existed here. And people like Rebecca can't stand things they can't control. The strange part was how fast the neighborhood turned against me once Rebecca started talking. It happened quietly at first. A few blinds closing when I walked past. Conversations stopping near the mailbox cluster. Parents pulling their kids back toward driveways whenever the windmill creaked across the evening air. Creak, creak, creak. Like somehow the sound itself carried contamination. I noticed it most on Thursday mornings because that was trash pickup day. My father used to call Thursdays the real neighborhood meeting. People standing outside in slippers holding coffee cups while pretending not to gossip. Before the HOA war started, old Mr. Donnelly from 2 houses over used to wave at me. Every week. Retired plumber. Vietnam veteran. Smelled permanently like pipe tobacco and motor oil. Then one morning, I rolled my trash bin to the curb and caught him looking at the windmill with this nervous expression like it might explode if he stared too long. He lowered his voice before speaking. Rebecca says property values already dropped 3%. 3%. The way he said it made it sound like someone had died. The morning air smelled like wet grass and diesel exhaust from the garbage truck grinding down Willow Creek Drive, while I stood there trying not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Because of a windmill? I asked. Donnelly shrugged without looking me in the eye. People get weird around money, Ethan. He was right about that. By the second month, Rebecca had transformed the whole thing into a full-scale campaign. HOA newsletters started appearing in mailboxes with bold red headlines about preserving community harmony. During one meeting, she actually brought in a real estate consultant who claimed rural structures psychologically reduced luxury home appeal. I sat in the back folding my arms while the projector hummed against the clubhouse wall. Every slide showed my backyard from different angles. Zoomed-in photographs. Shadows exaggerated. Rust highlighted with red circles like forensic evidence. Rebecca stood beside the screen smiling calmly while her manicured fingernail tapped the laser pointer against the image of my father's windmill. Unchecked visual decline, she called it. I remember the sound of ice clinking inside someone's lemonade glass while she spoke. Nobody challenged her. That was the disturbing part. Not because they agreed. Because they were afraid of becoming next. Rebecca had spent 6 years building that fear one violation at a time. Grass too tall. Christmas lights left up too long. Unauthorized patio furniture. She controlled the neighborhood through paperwork and exhaustion. By then, I had already spent nearly $4,000 fighting fines and compliance notices. Every envelope from the HOA carried the same smell of fresh ink and legal threats. I kept them stacked on my kitchen counter beside my father's old wrench set. One pile built things. The other destroyed them. Then came the drone incident. I woke up around 5:30 one morning to the faint mechanical buzz outside my bedroom window. At first I thought it was a mosquito trapped against the screen. Then I saw it hovering over my backyard. Black quadcopter. Flashing green light. Camera aimed directly at my house. The thing drifted slowly toward the windmill blades while the sunrise painted the metal orange. Creak, creak, creak. I stepped outside barefoot into the cold grass and watched it circle overhead like a surveillance helicopter. 20 minutes later, another violation notice hit my email inbox. Potential safety concerns regarding rotating mechanical equipment. Timestamp attached. They had used drone footage as evidence. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Because until then, I still believed this was about rules. About appearances. About neighborhood politics. But standing there in my yard with that machine buzzing over my father's property while the windmill turned against the dawn sky, I realized Rebecca Holloway was not trying to protect the community. She was trying to erase anything she could not control. The certified letter arrived at exactly 6:12 in the morning. I remember because the coffee maker had just started sputtering when I heard the metallic clank of the mailbox outside. The sun was barely up. Thin gray light across the kitchen floor. Windmill creaking softly beyond the back window. Creak, creak, creak. I walked barefoot down the gravel path wearing old jeans and my father's faded thermal shirt. The air smelled like wet cedar and cold dirt after an overnight drizzle. There it was sitting inside the mailbox. Thick white envelope. Official HOA seal stamped in dark blue ink. Heavy paper. Expensive paper. The kind lawyers use when they want fear to arrive before the words do. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Demand for damages. $50,000. I actually laughed at first. Not because it was funny. Because my brain refused to process the number. I stood there beside the mailbox rereading the page while the windmill turned behind me like an old clock, counting down to something ugly. According to Rebecca Holloway and the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, my windmill had caused community-wide depreciation, emotional distress among residents, and sustained luxury market interference. Emotional distress. From a windmill. The paper trembled slightly in my hand from the cold morning breeze. Or maybe from anger. Hard to tell. They gave me 14 days to pay before initiating foreclosure proceedings against my property. Foreclosure. Over noise complaints and aesthetics. At the bottom sat Rebecca's signature in sharp black ink, clean and confident like she had already won. Silence has value, Mr. Walker. She actually wrote that sentence into the letter. I must have read it 20 times standing there by the road while the neighborhood slowly woke around me. Garage doors humming open. Sprinkler systems hissing across perfect lawns. Somewhere down the street, a golden retriever barked twice before getting shushed by its owner. Funny what qualifies as acceptable sound in Willow Creek Estates. I drove straight to the HOA office after that. Little beige building next to the community tennis courts where everything smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh paint. Rebecca sat behind a polished oak desk reviewing paperwork when I walked in. White blazer again. Gold necklace. Perfect posture. She did not even look surprised to see me. Mr. Walker, she said calmly, folding her hands. I expected you earlier. The woman spoke like a flight attendant announcing turbulence. I dropped the demand letter onto her desk hard enough to slide her coffee cup an inch sideways. $50,000? I asked. For what exactly? Rebecca adjusted the stack of papers in front of her before answering. No emotion. No hesitation. Your structure has become a measurable nuisance to the community. Structure. She refused to call it a windmill now. You cannot put a dollar amount on annoyance, I said. Rebecca smiled faintly. Actually, we can. The board hired a consulting firm. She turned her monitor toward me. Spreadsheet after spreadsheet filled the screen. Property value projections. Market charts. Complaint summaries. Every line item tied somehow to my backyard. This is insanity, I muttered. No, she replied softly. This is governance. That word hung in the room like smoke. Governance. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I stared at this woman trying to monetize silence like she owned the atmosphere itself. Then she leaned back slightly in her chair and said the sentence that finally made my pulse spike. If you cannot afford compliance, perhaps this community is no longer suitable for you. There it was. Not rules. Not aesthetics. Removal. Rebecca Holloway did not want compromise. She wanted surrender. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I realized something colder beneath all of it. She fully believed nobody would stop her. For the next 2 weeks, I stopped arguing. That confused Rebecca more than anything. No angry emails. No lawyer threats. No dramatic confrontations at HOA meetings. I just went quiet. Every morning, I drank coffee on the back porch while the windmill turned above the dry pasture behind my house. Creak, creak, creak. The sound drifted across Willow Creek Estates like a slow heartbeat nobody could shut off. Rebecca interpreted my silence as defeat. You could see it in the way she carried herself after that. Her golf cart started appearing near my property almost daily now. White visor, oversized sunglasses, clipboard resting in her lap like some kind of suburban badge of authority. Sometimes she would stop near the edge of my driveway pretending to inspect landscaping violations while her drone buzzed overhead taking pictures. Other times she just stared at the windmill turning against the sky with this tight expression that looked less like anger and more like obsession. Meanwhile, the fines kept growing. 50,000 became 52, then 54. Every violation notice arrived with another stack of legal language threatening liens, foreclosure reviews, and court action. I pinned every single one to the wall above my kitchen counter. By the end of the second week, the papers covered nearly half the room like some giant collage built out of intimidation. My friend Caleb stopped by one evening after work and stood there staring at the wall while the smell of barbecue smoke drifted over from a neighbor's yard. Man, he muttered quietly, this is insane. Caleb had known me since high school. Former county surveyor. Practical guy. Not easily rattled. He walked closer to one of the notices and squinted at the HOA seal. You ever actually read their property map? He asked. What do you mean? He pointed toward the fine print near the bottom of the paperwork. Their jurisdiction overlay. That sentence stayed with me long after he left. Around midnight, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by old property records while the house creaked softly around me. My father kept everything. Deeds, utility maps, tax assessments, zoning applications dating back 30 years stacked neatly inside old metal filing cabinets in the garage. Dust floated through the beam of my desk lamp while I dug through yellowed county records that smelled like old paper and machine oil. Around 2 in the morning, I found it. One folded survey map dated 12 years earlier, before Willow Creek Estates expanded into the north parcel beside my property. Before Rebecca became HOA president. My pulse slowed the second I spread the map across the table. Because according to county records, the southern edge of my land was never legally annexed into the HOA at all. I checked it 3 times just to make sure I was not hallucinating from exhaustion. Then I pulled up the digital county zoning archive online. Same result. The windmill sat entirely outside HOA enforcement boundaries, completely outside their jurisdiction. I leaned back in my chair listening to the refrigerator hum while adrenaline crept slowly into my bloodstream. Then something even stranger caught my eye. The current HOA map on Rebecca's violation notices did not match the county survey. Not even close. The lines had been altered. adjusted almost 20 feet inward across multiple lots, including mine. I could actually see where the digital overlay had been manipulated. Sloppy too. Like someone assumed nobody would ever compare the documents side by side. The air suddenly felt different inside the room. Electric. I grabbed another file and started checking neighboring lots. Then another. And another. By 3:15 in the morning, my kitchen table looked like a detective board from a crime documentary. Property records everywhere. Boundary overlays. Tax documents. HOA maps. Coffee gone cold beside my elbow. That was when I realized Rebecca Holloway had not just targeted me. She had quietly expanded HOA control over dozens of homes that legally did not belong inside the subdivision. And if I was right, Willow Creek Estates had been collecting unauthorized fees for years. Outside, the windmill turned slowly against the dark Texas sky. Creak, creak, creak. This time the sound did not feel annoying. It sounded like evidence. The next morning I drove straight to the county records office before the sun burned the fog off the highway. The building sat 20 miles outside town beside a faded water tower and a feed supply store that still sold tractor parts older than me. Inside, everything smelled like dust, printer ink, and old air conditioning filters. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while clerks shuffled paperwork behind thick plastic windows scratched by decades of frustrated taxpayers. I carried copies of the HOA maps under my arm inside a cardboard tube my father used to store blueprints. Funny how his tools kept helping me long after he was gone. Caleb met me there around 9, carrying a coffee the size of a paint can and wearing the same grim expression he used whenever he smelled bureaucratic nonsense. We spread the maps across a long metal table under the public records sign while ceiling fans clicked lazily above us. Side by side, the difference was obvious now. County zoning lines in black. HOA enforcement overlays in blue. Rebecca's version had swallowed entire sections of neighboring property that legally should have remained outside subdivision authority. She moved the boundaries, Caleb muttered quietly. No, I replied, staring harder at the maps. She counted on nobody checking. We spent 4 hours digging through annexation filings, subdivision amendments, and county approvals. Or more accurately, the approvals that did not exist. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. There was no signed county authorization expanding HOA jurisdiction over my parcel or at least 14 others. Nothing. No hearing minutes. No planning approval. No recorded amendment. Yet somehow Willow Creek Estates had been issuing violations, collecting dues, and threatening liens against homeowners for years. The deeper we dug, the uglier it became. One older couple had apparently paid nearly $20,000 in landscaping penalties after being told their backyard shed violated subdivision design codes. Another homeowner sold her house during divorce proceedings and lost part of the sale value because of unresolved HOA fines that legally should never have existed in the first place. Rebecca had built an entire system around intimidation and paperwork. Most people saw official-looking documents and folded immediately. By noon, I could feel the weight of what we had uncovered settling into my chest like wet concrete. Caleb rubbed his jaw while scanning another file. You realize this is bigger than your windmill now. He was right. This was fraud territory. Real fraud. The kind that makes judges stop smiling. I decided to test something before making any moves. That evening I attended the monthly HOA meeting for the first time in weeks. The clubhouse smelled like vanilla candles and fresh carpet cleaner. Rows of folding chairs filled slowly with nervous homeowners clutching printed agendas, while Rebecca stood near the projector greeting people with polished little smiles. The projector hummed softly against the wall behind her, displaying the meeting title in elegant cursive lettering. Community Harmony Review. I sat in the back without saying a word. Rebecca noticed me immediately. I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened for half a second before recovering. Then the meeting started. Fence complaints. Parking disputes. Lawn compliance reviews. Same suburban theater as always. Finally, Rebecca clicked to the next slide. My windmill filled the screen again. Enlarged. Circled in red. As discussed, she announced calmly. Ongoing nuisance violations continue affecting neighborhood stability. The room stayed silent. Then Rebecca looked directly at me. Mr. Walker still refuses cooperation despite substantial financial leniency from the board. Financial leniency. I almost laughed out loud hearing $50,000 described like charity. Instead, I raised my hand slowly. Every head in the room turned toward me. "Can I ask a question?" Rebecca smiled thinly. Briefly, I stood up holding a folded county map in one hand. The paper crackled in the silence. When exactly did Willow Creek Estates receive county approval to expand enforcement boundaries over the southern parcels? The room froze. Completely froze. Even the projector fan suddenly sounded loud. Rebecca blinked once. Tiny movement. Barely noticeable unless you were watching closely. "That matter was resolved years ago," she replied smoothly. "Great," I said calmly. "Then you should have no problem showing the approval records." And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Rebecca Holloway looked uncertain. Rebecca recovered fast. I will give her that. Most people panic when cornered in public, but Rebecca Holloway had spent years weaponizing confidence. She adjusted the cuff of her white blazer, smiled toward the room, and gave a soft little laugh like I had asked whether aliens built the clubhouse. "County approvals are handled through administrative review," she said smoothly. "The board has already addressed these concerns internally." Internally. That word floated through the room like air freshener covering smoke. A few homeowners nodded automatically because people tend to trust confident voices in expensive clothes. But not everybody. I noticed old Mr. Donnelly staring down at his printed agenda with a deep crease between his eyebrows. 2 rows ahead, a woman named Claire Jensen slowly lowered her coffee cup and looked at Rebecca differently for the first time. Tiny cracks. That was all it took. I stayed calm. "Interesting," I replied. "Because county records say no approval exists." The projector hummed loudly in the silence that followed. Rebecca's smile did not disappear, but it hardened around the edges. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully, "if you have concerns regarding historical paperwork, you may submit them through legal channels instead of disrupting community meetings." Legal channels. There it was again. That assumption that official language automatically equals authority. But something had changed inside the room now. You could feel it. The atmosphere turned heavier, less obedient. People started looking at each other instead of at Rebecca. That night my phone buzzed for nearly 3 straight hours. Homeowners I barely knew suddenly wanted to talk. Quiet voices. Nervous questions. One couple invited me over through their garage instead of the front door, like we were planning a bank robbery instead of discussing zoning maps. Their kitchen smelled like cinnamon candles and reheated lasagna, while they showed me violation notices dating back 5 years. Another homeowner revealed she had paid nearly $8,000 in fines after Rebecca threatened legal action over a backyard pergola that apparently violated community symmetry standards. The deeper I looked, the more patterns emerged. Rebecca always targeted people who lived alone. Widowers, retirees, divorced homeowners. People too exhausted or intimidated to fight paperwork wrapped in legal language. By Friday evening, I had an entire cardboard box full of copies. Unauthorized fines, boundary disputes, threat letters, altered maps. I spread everything across my dining room table while thunder rolled softly outside beyond the pasture. Rain tapped against the windows. The windmill turned slowly in the dark. Creak, creak, creak. Caleb leaned over one of the files and whistled quietly. This woman built a business model out of fear. He was right. Then we found the document that changed everything. Buried inside an old HOA budget packet was an invoice from a private consulting company called Meridian Land Compliance Services. $72,000 paid over 4 years for overlay management adjustments. Overlay management. Fancy words for moving lines on maps. I stared at the invoice while cold rain streaked across the windows behind me. "She outsourced the fraud," Caleb muttered. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a homeowner and started thinking strategically. Because this was no longer about proving innocence. It was about proving intent. The next morning I drove back to the county office and filed formal requests for every annexation filing tied to Willow Creek Estates over the last decade. The clerk behind the counter raised an eyebrow after seeing the stack of forms. "Big neighborhood dispute?" she asked casually. I looked toward the courthouse across the street where an American flag snapped sharply in the wind above the roofline. "Something like that," I replied. By Monday afternoon, Rebecca escalated. Another certified letter arrived. This time the language felt colder. "Immediate legal review pending. Foreclosure recommendation authorized. Failure to comply may result in seizure proceedings." The paper smelled so strongly of fresh toner, it almost burned my nose. But attached behind the threat notice was something unexpected. A court summons. Rebecca had officially dragged me into civil court. I sat alone at my kitchen table staring at the document while rainwater dripped steadily from the porch roof outside. Most people would have panicked seeing that envelope. Honestly, part of me did too. But underneath the fear, something else settled in quietly. Relief. Because for the first time since this started, Rebecca Holloway was about to stand somewhere she could not control. The courthouse smelled exactly like every courthouse I had ever been inside. Burnt coffee, old paper, floor polish, and recycled air struggling through ancient vents. The sound of dress shoes echoed sharply across marble floors while attorneys drifted through the hallways carrying overstuffed briefcases and expressions that looked permanently irritated. My hearing was scheduled for 9:30 on a Wednesday morning, but I arrived an hour early carrying 2 banker boxes full of documents and a flash drive sitting deep in my jacket pocket. Outside, storm clouds rolled low across the Texas sky, turning the courthouse windows gray. Caleb met me near the security checkpoint, holding another stack of county records under his arm. "You ready?" he asked quietly. I looked toward courtroom 3, where Rebecca's attorney was already standing outside the door, talking into a phone. Expensive suit. Silver cufflinks. The kind of lawyer who billed by the breath. Rebecca stood beside him perfectly composed in another ivory-colored outfit that probably cost more than my pickup truck payment. She glanced toward me once without smiling. No anger. No fear. Just confidence. That was the dangerous thing about people like Rebecca Holloway. They believe systems belong to them. Courtrooms. Boards. Committees. Rules. They move through authority like homeowners through automatic grocery store doors. Everything opens automatically because nobody ever taught them the word no. But confidence starts cracking when facts arrive. We entered the courtroom at exactly 9:22. Dark wood walls. State flag behind the bench. The faint hum of fluorescent lighting overhead. The judge had not arrived yet, so everyone settled into quiet little islands of tension while papers shuffled softly across tables. Rebecca's attorney nodded politely at me with the detached smile people use before attempting legal homicide. I sat calmly beside Caleb and opened the first banker box. Inside sat everything. Original county maps, tax overlays, drone footage timestamps, homeowner statements, financial invoices, annexation records, and most importantly, copies of HOA enforcement notices issued against properties legally outside subdivision authority. The courtroom doors opened sharply at 9:30. All rise. Judge Harold Bennett entered carrying reading glasses and a coffee mug stained dark around the rim. Mid-60s. Tired eyes. Practical face. The kind of man who looked deeply annoyed by nonsense before breakfast. Everybody sat once he settled behind the bench. Rebecca's attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor, Willow Creek Estates seeks enforcement of ongoing community violations resulting in substantial property devaluation and financial harm." Financial harm. That phrase sounded ridiculous now. The attorney launched into a polished presentation full of charts, complaint summaries, and dramatic language about neighborhood deterioration. Then came the projector. My windmill filled the courtroom wall again, creaking metal against sunset skies. Rebecca sat perfectly, still while the attorney described it like environmental terrorism. The unauthorized structure created measurable emotional distress among residents, he stated confidently. I actually saw Judge Bennett pause writing for a second after hearing that sentence. Tiny movement, barely noticeable. Then the attorney reached the number. The association therefore seeks damages totaling $50,000. Silence settled across the room. Judge Bennett slowly removed his glasses. $50,000, he repeated carefully. For a windmill. Rebecca's attorney cleared his throat. For sustained nuisance impact, Your Honor. The judge stared at him for several long seconds while the courtroom ventilation rattled overhead. Then he looked down toward the file in front of him. Interesting, he muttered quietly. Because according to county records submitted this morning, the structure may not even fall under HOA jurisdiction. That was the first crack. Rebecca shifted slightly beside her attorney. Tiny movement. But I noticed. The judge continued reading silently for another few moments while pages turned softly beneath his hands. Then he looked directly toward Rebecca for the first time. "Mrs. Holloway," he asked calmly, "would you care to explain why your enforcement maps do not match county annexation records?" And just like that, The entire atmosphere inside the courtroom changed. The confidence, the posture, the illusion of control. I watched Rebecca Holloway realize something terrifying in real time. For years, she had controlled every room she entered, every meeting, every vote, every frightened homeowner standing alone against official paperwork. But courtrooms are different. Because unlike HOA meetings, judges can ask follow-up questions. Rebecca opened her mouth twice before any words came out. That was the first time I had ever seen her struggle for control. The woman who used to lecture homeowners about mailbox paint codes without blinking suddenly looked like somebody had pulled oxygen out of the room. Her attorney stepped in quickly, smoothing his tie while forcing a professional smile. Your Honor, there may have been administrative inconsistencies over the years regarding subdivision overlays, but the association has operated under good faith enforcement standards. Good faith. Judge Bennett leaned back slowly in his chair and stared over the rim of his reading glasses. Counselor, he said calmly, good faith usually requires legal authority. The courtroom fell silent except for the faint scratching of the court reporter's keyboard. I could hear rain tapping softly against the courthouse windows now. Outside, thunder rolled low across the sky. Inside, Rebecca Holloway's entire empire had started shaking. Her attorney attempted another recovery. He argued historical precedent, community expectations, voluntary compliance. But every explanation sounded weaker than the one before it. Because facts have weight. And once enough of them pile together, even expensive lawyers start sinking. Judge Bennett turned toward me next. Mr. Walker, he said, you submitted additional exhibits this morning? Yes, Your Honor. My voice sounded calmer than I expected. I stood and carried the banker box toward the evidence table while every eye in the courtroom followed me. The cardboard edges dug into my palms. Years of violation notices, financial records, homeowner statements, altered maps, quiet little pieces of intimidation stacked one on top of another until the whole structure finally became visible. I handed the first folder to the bailiff. These are county-certified annexation records showing my property and multiple neighboring parcels were never legally transferred into HOA jurisdiction. Judge Bennett flipped through the pages slowly while Rebecca's attorney rubbed his forehead harder with each document. Then came the invoices from Meridian Land Compliance Services. The judge studied them carefully. Overlay management adjustments, he read aloud. Can someone explain exactly what that means? Nobody answered immediately. Rebecca finally spoke up from her table. Those were administrative consulting services, she said tightly, necessary for maintaining community standards. The judge looked directly at her. Mrs. Holloway, did your association alter enforcement boundary maps without county approval? The air inside the courtroom felt electrically still. Rebecca hesitated. Tiny pause. But pauses matter in courtrooms. We relied on internal interpretation of applicable property zones. She replied carefully. Judge Bennett lowered the documents onto the bench very slowly. That is not what I asked. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Caleb handed me the flash drive. Small black piece of plastic no bigger than a stick of gum. The thing that finally broke everything open. Your Honor, I said, I would also like to submit recorded footage from a public HOA meeting held 3 weeks ago. Rebecca's head snapped toward me instantly. Real fear this time. The courtroom monitor flickered on. Grainy video filled the screen. Rebecca standing beside the projector inside the clubhouse. Her voice crisp and confident through the speakers. The county rarely reviews subdivision overlays once enforcement is established, video Rebecca said casually. Most homeowners never challenge jurisdiction anyway. I watched the color drain slowly from her face while the recording continued. As long as compliance revenue remains stable, there is no reason to revisit the southern parcel boundaries. The silence afterward felt enormous. Judge Bennett removed his glasses completely now. He rubbed one hand across his jaw while staring toward Rebecca like he could not decide whether he was angry or genuinely amazed. Mrs. Holloway, he said finally, are you seriously telling this court your association knowingly enforced regulations outside its legal authority because you assumed residents would not verify county records? Rebecca's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, I advised my client not to answer further at this stage. Smartest thing anybody had said all morning. Judge Bennett nodded once. Then he looked down toward the stack of demand letters sitting near his elbow. He picked up the top page slowly. Emotional neighborhood distress, he read aloud quietly. $50,000 for the sound of a windmill. He let the paper fall back onto the bench. I have been on this court for 23 years, he muttered, almost to himself. And this may be the most absurd abuse of HOA authority I have ever seen. Across the courtroom, Rebecca Holloway finally stopped looking powerful. 6 months later, the Willow Creek Estates clubhouse sat completely dark. No polished meetings. No compliance committees. No projector humming against the walls while Rebecca Holloway lectured exhausted homeowners about visual harmony. Just an empty parking lot scattered with wind-blown leaves and a faded foreclosure notice taped crooked across the front glass door. Funny how fast power disappears once people stop pretending it is legitimate. The investigation spread far beyond my case after the hearing. County auditors started digging through HOA financial records. Then came state investigators reviewing unauthorized fee collections tied to illegally enforced parcels. Homeowners who had stayed quiet for years suddenly found their voices all at once. Lawsuits piled up like storm debris after a flood. Refund demands. Property claims. Fraud allegations. Turns out fear works both ways once evidence enters the room. Rebecca resigned as HOA president 3 weeks after the court hearing. According to local rumors, her realtor license review did not go well either. I never bothered following every detail after that. By then I had already learned something important. People like Rebecca spend so much time controlling appearances that they forget reality eventually arrives with paperwork of its own. Caleb called me one evening near the end of summer while I was repairing fence posts out by the north pasture. The sun hung low across the fields, turning everything copper orange. "You hear about Holloway?" he asked. I leaned against the post driver, wiping sweat from my hands with an old shop rag. "Nope." Caleb let out a slow whistle. "She sold the Lexus." I stared across the property for a second while cicadas buzzed loudly in the heat. Strange the details you remember. Not the courtroom. Not the judge. The Lexus. That perfect white vehicle she used to glide around the neighborhood like a parade float for suburban authority. "Gone." "Huh," I said quietly. Guess silence got expensive. Caleb laughed hard enough I had to pull the phone away from my ear. By early fall, county officials formally dissolved large portions of the HOA enforcement district. Several homeowners received reimbursement settlements. Others simply removed violation notices from their records and tried to move on with their lives. The strange thing was how different the neighborhood felt afterward. Lighter somehow. Kids rode bicycles without parents whispering about compliance issues. People painted front doors different colors. One guy even built a tool shed without filing 12 approval forms first. Civilization survived somehow. And every evening, right around sunset, the windmill still turned above my property exactly like it had when my father built it decades ago. Creak, creak, creak. The sound carried softly through the cooling Texas air while porch lights blinked on across the neighborhood. Nobody complained anymore. Nobody sent letters. Nobody measured emotional distress against property values. Sometimes I would sit out back with a cup of coffee listening to the blades turn while dusk settled over the pasture grass. The smell of cedar drifted through the evening breeze, and the old metal frame groaned gently against the wind like it was remembering things too. I thought a lot about my father during those nights. About how stubborn he was. About how he used to say some people mistake paperwork for power because they have never built anything real with their hands. He would have loved the irony of all this. An entire HOA collapsing because they tried to bully a man over the sound of a windmill turning on land they never legally controlled in the first place. In the end, that was the funniest part of the whole story. Rebecca Holloway spent years trying to silence things that made the neighborhood feel imperfect. Old structures, old people, old land. Anything that reminded her the world existed before her rules did. But every time the wind catches those blades now, I hear something different in that old creaking sound drifting across the property at sunset. Not noise, not nuisance, just a quiet reminder that real authority does not scream through threat letters or hide behind fake maps. Real authority survives scrutiny. And the louder Rebecca tried to control everything around her, the more obvious her collapse became once somebody finally asked for proof.